In this lesson, we're going to have a look at the question of persistence when it comes to personal identity. So we're going to be outlining a few basic terms that we need to really understand if we're going to try and understand the philosophy of personal identity. And then in the next few videos, we're going to start looking at actual theories of personal identity and seeing how we can maybe critique them or make them better. So specifically in this lesson, we're going to introduce the issue of persistence. We're going to work out how we can formalize it in a sort of formal philosophical way. We're going to have a look at the difference between necessity and sufficiency when it comes to necessary persistent and sufficient persistent. So what is the issue of persistence? The question we're going to ask in this course is, who am I? But in order to answer this question properly, we must also look at the issue of persistence. And the problem of persistence is, in attempting to answer the problem of persistence, what we're trying to do is ask ourselves, how do we exist over time? Not just who am I at one particular point, but what allows me to exist over a period of time, i.e. over someone's lifetime. So, what are the things that make us exist from one point in time to another? A more formal way of writing and understanding the issue of persistence is, let's assume that a person X exists at a set point in time, a time t1. It's hard enough to answer the question of what makes X a person at t1, but what we want to do is ask another question. We want to ask, if we have some entity Y that exists at a different time, time t2, if X is equal to Y, that means that X and Y are the same person. So this means that X doesn't just exist at time t1, they must also have to exist at time t2, and therefore they have to persist through from time t1 to time t2, like so. And the question is, what is it that allows us to persist as a human, as a person, through personal identity from a point in time t1 and a point at time t2? It could be, what makes this person X being me that's existing at a set point time t1, let's say my 10th birthday. And then if we take something that exists at time t2, which is, say, when I'm 20, my 21st birthday, what does it mean to make those two the same person? How do we work out how somebody can persist through that time? That's what we're trying to answer. Okay, so this might sound very pedantic, a very pedantic way to formalize it, but it is very important. The idea of persistence involves what we call numerical identity, which means that something is literally identical to something else. This is different to the idea of qualitative identity, where things are the same. We say that they're identical because they share the same qualities, but in reality they're not actually identical. For example, if I had two green Ford Focuses side by side, I would say that they are identical, but I wouldn't say that they are numerically identical. What I'm saying is that they are qualitatively identical. They share the same qualities, i.e. the quality of being a Ford Focus and the quality of being green, but they're not numerically identical. They're not the exact same car. And that's the point we're trying to work out here. How can we have two things that are exactly the same that exist at two different points in time? And it's a very deeply metaphysical question. So, in summary, the problem of persistence is really a question of what does it take for a person to persist from one time to another? What does it take to continue rather than to just cease to exist? If I exist at time t1, what's to stop me from not existing at time t2 and being something else? Okay? More philosophically, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions for X to persist through time? Necessary meaning a necessary condition is something that one must have if we have to exist. A sufficient condition is a little less powerful. These are the conditions which are enough for somebody to persist. So what are the baseline, absolutely required conditions that we need in order to solve this issue of persistence? and then that's what we would call a necessary conditions. What are the sufficient conditions? We're talking about what are the bare minimum conditions that we need for persistence. So really, how are we going to work out the question, who am I, or what are we? So we're going to try and work out two questions. Really, what are we, or who am I, and under what conditions do we persist over time? And there are two philosophical formulations that we're going to look at to work out how personal identity works. We're going to have a look at the bodily view of personal identity, and we're going to look at the psychological view of personal identity, critique them both, and have a look at really how we can improve both of them. In the next lesson, we're going to have a look at the bodily view of personal identity, and then we're going to start to critique it later on.